So let's start this video by talking a little bit about economics. You see, it costs a lot of money to develop a platform for a car. It also costs a lot of money to develop a powertrain for a car. And when you put all of that together, you're looking at a potential R&D spend in the hundreds of millions, if not the billions of dollars. And the thing is, there are ways to make this cheaper. If you look at brands like Stellantis, for example, which own 650 brands by the sound of it, they have enough brands where they can share the platforms, the powertrains across 10 different models, for example, and that then brings down the cost of engineering per model. Now that's fine when you're talking about mass market vehicles. Cars like the Prodo Ativa, for example, shares the same DNGA platform as the upcoming Prodo Alza, as well as several Toyota models, and so again it makes it a little bit cheaper. The trouble arises when you're trying to build something a bit more special, because these special cars, these halo cars, tend to be lower volume, but it's also important that they feel like everything that the brand embodies. And this issue arises with the Toyota Supra, because this is Toyota's halo car. This is supposed to be the embodiment of Toyota having fun. But the fact of the matter is, they couldn't afford to build this car just on its own. The business case wasn't strong enough, and so this platform, this engine, this gearbox is borrowed from BMW. So I guess the question now is this just a BMW Z4 with a hardtop? Or does this car have enough soul and character to make it stand out, where it can truly say that this is a proper Toyota? My name is AIMAN ABDULLAH, this is MalaysianMotoring, and this is our review, several years late, of the Toyota GR Supra. Now the thing about the Supra is that you can't really describe it as beautiful. This isn't a beautiful car. You look at all of its fake inlets and its large gaping mouth, you wouldn't call this a pretty car. This is a car that's somewhat built to purpose, and a lot of this design was first previewed by the FT1 concept. Things like these headlights, which look a little bit like the A80 Supra, those beautiful curves at the back that look like an A60 Supra, I believe. All of these little things, all the little features on this car are made to hark back to the Supra's long heritage. And certain other features, like the nose of this car and the way the air intake sort of come underneath here, this little bit of painted, it's meant to look like a Formula One car, because, as Toyota does not want you to remember, they were in Formula One, although they didn't do very well. Now, in terms of the little things on this car, the details on this car are what really blow me away. Things like these 6 projector headlamps arranged the way they are, it just looks purposeful. These large air intakes on the front, these ones are genuinely mostly functional, except for this panel here, which houses the radar for the full adaptive cruise control, which this car has. You also have, as I said earlier, the fake vents there, but you do have a functional front splitter, again to help smooth air over the bonnet. The curves and creases on this car over this clamshell bonnet, for example, all of this just hints at the power that lies beneath. This 3-litre straight 6, as I mentioned earlier, is shared with BMW, but in this car it's massaged to produce 388 PS and 500 Newton meters of torque. Power goes to the rear wheels via an 8-speed ZF automatic gearbox, and it's capable of hurtling this car from rest to 100 kilometers an hour in 4.1 seconds. Why? Because why not? Now, where I will give this car props is down the side. The beautiful curves of this car just look the business. These flared haunches, these large alloy wheels with this beautiful dual tone chrome and black finish, and the way it curves over the rear end, just to show you just how potent this car is. It's all very sexy. It also helps that when you're inside the car looking out the rearview mirrors, all you see out of them are those rear haunches. Not great for safety, great for your ego. Now, the small problem with this car is that there are more vents down here on the side, like a supercar. Fortunately, these also don't do anything. What does do something, however, is this. This is the fuel cap, which is something that if you have a Supra, you'll probably use quite a bit. The fuel goes in there, and it runs on RON 95, which is still cheap for now. Now the back end of this car again is a little bit more function over form. That's why you've got this built-in ducktail spoiler, and you can see that all the surfaces have been smoothed off in order to give this car better aerodynamic performance. What doesn't give this car better aerodynamic performance, however, is this vent here, which does jack. You also get a rear diffuser, which does do something, because that does genuinely provide some downforce, and they house the enormous exhaust that this car comes with, and it sounds incredible. The diffuser also houses this. This is of course meant to hark back to Toyota's brief and rather unsuccessful period in Formula One, so you have that little thing to look like the rain light that you get on Formula One cars. However, here it houses either the reverse lights or the fog lights, depending on what you're using. The tail lights are naturally all LED because it's a new car, so it shouldn't have LEDs. And overall, the aesthetic of this car does look pretty good. My favorite feature on the Supra, however, is the roof, because it's got a double bubble design, which not only helps with aerodynamics, but it also harks back to race cars where you needed a little bit more clearance for a helmet. Unfortunately, I don't own a helmet, so I can't check, but I reckon it would probably fit, also because I'm short. Now, what is a little bit annoying, however, is that back here, there is no release for the boot. Not here, nowhere on there you need the key, which also looks like a BMW item, but never mind. When you do open the boot, however, there is a surprising amount of space. Yes, the boot is not very deep, it is kind of shallow, but it goes in quite a way, and it is taken up a little bit by the dual subwoofers as part of the JBL audio system that this car comes with, but you can fit quite a bit in here, including, I suspect, a set of golf clubs. Now, with the boot open, you will notice these little things, and I feel like this is the best example of how Toyota is trying to keep the spirit of the Supra alive, because this is a reinforcement point so that you can mount a spoiler. And that brings me on to those fake vents I mentioned earlier. Now, of course, fake vents are never a fun thing when you see them on a car, but Toyota says that the vents are there and engineered into the car so that if you want to do something to it, you can open those vents up for extra cooling and added airflow. They want you to tune this car, and I feel like that is in keeping with the Supra that we know. I appreciate that. Let's see if there's more to appreciate inside. Now, inside the GR Supra, despite being a very stylish car, there is nowhere for me to put my sunglasses, so I guess I'll just have to... Anyway, a lot of the interior features in here look very familiar, especially if you spend a lot of time in a certain German car. Everything from the gear lever, the infotainment system controller, the HVAC controls, and even the shortcut buttons for the infotainment system, which are touch sensitive, mind you. All of this is lifted wholesale from MalaysianMotoring, and that all looks very familiar. You also get a very familiar looking steering wheel, which, although it is lifted from said German company, all the buttons and all the switchgear all fall very easily to hand, and so I guess that is the benefit of working with a company like BMW. The stalks also are lifted from BMW, and I can report that the indicator stalk does work. The light controls also lifted from the latest generation 3 Series, but what isn't, however, shared with BMW is the instrument cluster up ahead. This is a unique Toyota item which they spent a lot of time retooling to make it look and feel and operate the way they wanted to for the Supra. Because understandably, when you're sat here as a driver, this is what you're going to see first, and so this sets the tone of the vehicle. And so I do appreciate the fact that Toyota put in a lot of effort to make this unique. The central rev counter, for example, the very clear displays, it just looks beautiful. What is also beautiful is a heads-up display, which also does not feel like a BMW item. It feels very Japanese, and if I'm not mistaken, when you put the car's adaptive cruise control on, there's a Camry that comes out. Interesting. Now, when you go through the infotainment system, every little mention that might say BMW now says Toyota or Supra. So for example, the safety system is now called Toyota Safety System. The assistant in here is now called the Toyota Supra Assistant, all in a bid to try and remove some of the Germanness from this car. What they didn't remove is, however, the way the switchgear operates, which is all very nice. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as infotainment systems are concerned, this is entirely acceptable. And it's definitely better than what you get in the GR Yaris. What isn't unacceptable, however, is the fact that this infotainment system does not come with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Not wired, not wireless, not nothing. No Android Auto. which is very, very strange because this is ultimately still a $600,000 sports car, and it should come with something that simple. Simply because I want my Spotify, I want my Waze, I want to be able to respond to text messages via voice. Is that so much to ask for? Now, in terms of practicality, surprisingly, the GR Supra is not that impractical. No, there are no back seats. This is a strict two-seater, but you do get door bins big enough for a wallet. You get a couple of cup holders here. There's a little cubby hole back there. There is a rather shallow glove box. That's the word I was looking for, which is fine. You do, however, get a USB-A port here, a 12-volt socket, and a Qi wireless charger up here, which is great. You also get ISOFIX mounts on this passenger seat so that you can bring your kid to kindergarten in the Supra. I'd love to see a shot of a child seat in this car. I think that would be pretty damn epic. Now, enough waffling about inside here. I guess it's time to go and take this car out for a drive, and that means turning it on. Now, driving the GR Supra is, well, it's quite an experience. I mean, for starters, as you get in, you're in this very hemmed-in cabin and you're looking out through what is essentially a letterbox kind of windscreen. And there's no running away from the fact that this is ultimately a sports car. This is not like the GR Yaris, where it feels like they took a hatchback, the fundamentals of a hatchback, and turned up the wig. This is a car that was built from the ground up to be something a little bit more special, and you certainly feel that from behind the wheel. Now, I'm going to do this review by talking about the negatives and then the positives, because the negatives all have to do with the BMW-ness of this car, because that is the question we're trying to answer. Is this a BMW in a kimono, or is this a Japanese boy that can speak German? And the BMW-ness kind of comes through a little bit, especially when you're on the throttle, because you have that 3-litre straight six in the front. And as much as Toyota wants this car to howl the way their straight sixes used to, because of the way forced induction is now, and also because of regulations and so on, there are certain limitations to just how far this car can go. It revs to about 6,500 RPM, and you can tell that Toyota has tried to rework the exhaust a little bit to try and make the sound of this car a little bit more high-pitched versus the sort of growl that you get with BMW straight six engines. The other thing with this car is the way it steers. So, I am personally a fan of Grand Tourers. I've owned one, two, and I've driven quite a few. And I like the way a Grand Tourer is both sort of soft and supple when you are not in the mood, and then as in when you are in the mood, it sort of lights up and it rewards you. And coming into this, I thought that it would be a bit more of a Grand Touring experience, because you have a long bonnet up front, it's front engine, you've got a decently sized boot sort of there, which you can access from the cabin at any given time, and you've got a 3-litre in the front with almost 400 PS, and so it feels like it's got all of the ingredients to make this a Grand Tourer. But as I've driven it now almost 600 kilometers, I can tell you with certainty that it's not. The very short wheelbase on this car, which I suspect might be shorter than the Z4, and a little note will appear here if it isn't, or if it is, whatever the difference might be. But because of that short wheelbase, it means that this car is very agile. So it feels attentive the way the GR Yaris does as well. You turn the wheel and there's an immediacy to this car's reaction that makes it feel like a true blue sports car. And what that means is when you're driving out on B roads, for example, because of the sheer reactivity of the steering wheel, it means that you can really enjoy tight, twisty corners in this car because it's just ever so willing to lap them up. The trouble with that, however, is that when you're trying to get to that nice B road, you know how the roads to a B road tend to be a bit shite? Yeah, because of that short wheelbase, the car never really calms down. It's always jittery, it's always a little bit sort of hopping and kind of always going. It never settles down, never calms down. It's not like what you get from, say, even a Volkswagen Golf for that matter with its adaptive suspension, or, very handily, a Bentley Continental GT, like the one that you might be able to see out the window going past. Those are cars where it has a very a duality to its personality. This car seems to be very single-faceted in that sense. Now, the other detriment to that short wheelbase, because it never really settles down, means that when you're on a motorway, when you're doing motorway cruising, it can get a little bit tiring. I took this car to Tanjung Malim, and whenever I go to Tanjung Malim, I tend to take the federal roads there and then the motorway back to kind of figure out the personality of a car. And on the federal roads, this car was fine. Like I said, it was a bit jittery and the suspension is a bit stiff, even in comfort mode. But, you know, it was still livable. On the motorway though, that was where it got a little bit odd, because it kind of, you could sit at 110, 120 kilometers an hour, turn on the adaptive cruise control, and the car's got lane departure warning and lane keep assist, and so you can sit and do miles in this car quite comfortably. But because the suspension never really settles down, it does mean that all the movements in the cabin then translate to you. These are sports seats with side bolsters and all that, and it's not really impact absorbing, as it was. The seats are not doing much for you either, and passengers in this car have complained that after a little while of just driving through urban traffic and that sort of thing, you end up with a slight crick in your neck because your head is trying to constantly compensate for this car's jittery nature. So does this mean that you can drive this on the daily? I would say that you could, but there is a bit of a caveat. If you're looking at cars like, say, the Porsche 911 or even the Boxster or the Cayman for that matter, you would appreciate that those cars are a lot more stable, they're a lot more sort of flat and calm, and then when the mood takes you, they whip out that more engaging, more delightful sort of side to their personality. Whereas this car, it's always dialed in to providing driving pleasure. And as a result, it does mean that you have to, if you were to buy a car like this with the intent to drive it daily, you have to do so sort of knowing that there is a concession that has to be made to make this car work. But as I said earlier, this car does come with a full level 2 ADAS suite, which means that if you do want to drive it daily, it is actually capable of driving you through traffic jams. And that's the thing about the Supra. Although it is ultimately a sports car, it still has a very Toyota character to it. It's convenient, it's easy to use, but on top of that, it's also incredibly bold and breathtaking whenever you see it around. It might not be beautiful, sure, but it certainly turns heads, and when you're buying a sports car at this price, that may be what you're looking for. But what irritates me about the Supra is that I feel there isn't enough Toyota character in it. When you are driving on the limit, it feels too much like a BMW. And for a halo car from Toyota, it should feel like a Toyota. And in terms of halo car prestige, the GR Yaris does a slightly better job at putting Toyota's best foot forward. But ultimately, this doesn't matter, because if you want a Supra, you'll buy a Supra. It doesn't matter that I tell you that it sounds like a BMW. It doesn't matter that I'll tell you that the iDrive system in this car doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. It doesn't matter, because you'll buy it anyway. Why? Because it's a Supra. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.